Why was she the only one who hadn't spoken at the table? The others had shared stories, joked nervously, passed comments about the weather that clung outside the steel walls. But she just sat there, silent, eyes fixed on the map no one else seemed to care about. The room buzzed with low laughter, with the careless ease of soldiers who hadn't yet stepped into the dark. They talked to drown out the silence. She listened to it, she felt it, and she let it hold her still. Her name was Captain Elise Ward. To some, she was the quiet one, to others the difficult one. But in truth, she was something else entirely, something even she hadn't admitted to herself. Because there was a reason she didn't join in. There was a reason she stared at that single red circle on the map, as if it were a wound. And if the others knew why, if they understood what that mission really meant to her, they wouldn't have laughed at all. Not tonight. The hum of the fluorescent lights pressed down like a steady heartbeat. Outside, the storm tapped impatient fingers against the glass panes, a reminder that the world beyond was restless, unsettled. Ward, the commander's voice cut through the room, firm but not unkind. Her head lifted slowly. "You've read the brief." She gave the smallest nod, words still caught in her throat. The commander studied her, longer than he studied the others, almost as if he saw something there buried deep, a flicker of something he couldn't name. Then he looked away. "Wheels up at 0200, dismissed." The chairs scraped back, boots struck the floor. The others filed out, their voices picking up again, masks slipping back on. Elise stayed behind, alone. Her hand lingered on the edge of the table. The map lay flat, its ink fresh, its creases sharp. She leaned forward, pressing her palm over the red circle, as if by covering it she could erase it. But she couldn't. Because the circle wasn't just an objective. It wasn't just coordinates on foreign soil. It was a place she had been before. And it was where she had lost everything. The barracks smelled of oil, of canvas, of sweat that never truly left the air. Elise packed her gear methodically, each item placed with the same precision she had drilled into her soldiers for years. Gloves, ammo, water. Rifle stripped and checked again. Her hands were steady, but her chest was. Every inhale scraped. Every exhale weighed more than it should have. In the corner, Mason tied his boots, fumbling with the laces as though nerves had stolen his fingers. He was too young to be here, she thought, too alive still. "You ever think about what happens after?" he asked suddenly. His voice broke the stillness, awkward but honest. "I mean after this, after missions." She looked at him. His face was soft in the half-light, still holding the traces of boyhood. He wasn't hardened yet. He hadn't learned the cruel trick time plays on soldiers, that the after is never really after. She almost told him that, but instead she said nothing. She slid the last magazine into her pouch and pulled the strap tight. Mason gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah, dumb question." But it was. It was the only question that mattered. The wind outside tore at the airfield as they approached the waiting bird. The helicopter's rotors stirred grit into the storm, blurring outlines into shadows. She kept her head down, her rifle clutched tight against her chest. "Ward," a voice shouted over the roar. She turned. It was Alvarez, one of the older ones. Thick hands, a jaw that looked carved from stone, eyes always narrowed as if he distrusted the world itself. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it meant something. "Got your lucky coin?" he asked. She shook her head. "Never had one." He grunted. "That's your problem." He patted his vest, where Elise knew a worn silver coin rested inside, something his father had given him, something he swore had saved him more times than his rifle. For Elise there was no coin, no talisman, only memory, and memory didn't save. They climbed in. The bird lifted, the world fell away. Inside the fuselage, faces blurred under the dim red glow. Men and women who carried stories of their own, Losses tucked behind their eyes, regrets in their silence. Some whispered prayers. Others closed their eyes, fighting sleep they would not find. Elise sat still, helmet pressing against the steel wall, and let the vibration seep through her bones. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't pray. She just remembered. The last time she had been here. The last time she had set foot on that soil. Her brother's voice in her ear, calm but strained. The sound of gunfire tearing open the night. And the silence after it stopped. She had left him there. Or maybe she hadn't left. Maybe he had stayed by choice, by duty. She never knew. She only knew she carried the weight of it every single day. And now fate or command or something darker was sending her back. The helicopter cut low across the horizon. Clouds peeled away to reveal the dim lights of a sleeping village. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. But peace had a way of lying. She felt it before she saw it. The tension in the pilot's hands, the way the squad leader's voice dropped. Something wasn't right. "Eyes open," the leader barked. The bird dropped fast, thudding into the earth harder than expected. They spilled out, boots sinking into the mud, weapons raised. The storm had carried itself here too, wind ripping through the trees, shadows dancing in every flash of lightning. Move. They moved. The village lay silent, doors closed, windows dark, no movement, not even dogs, not even children. Elise scanned the rooftops, her scope catching the edges of broken tiles, jagged like teeth. The silence pressed in, too deep, too unnatural. Then, a sound. Small, fragile. A door creaked open at the far end of the street. They froze, rifles lifted. A figure stepped out, not armed, not tall, just small. A girl, maybe 8, maybe 9. Her dress was torn, her feet bare, her face pale with dirt. She looked at them, not with fear, but with something else. Something Elise couldn't place. And then she raised her hand, slowly, pointed. Elise's chest tightened. The child wasn't pointing at them. She was pointing past them. The thunder broke, and so did the silence. Gunfire tore through the street. Chaos erupted. Soldiers dove for cover, shouting over the storm of bullets. The walls cracked under impact. Sparks flared where metal kissed stone. Elise dropped behind a crumbling wall, her breath shallow, hands steady despite the roar in her ears. She leaned, sighting down her scope, catching fleeting shadows in the flashes of light. She fired once, twice. The shadows fell. Her heart didn't race. Her mind didn't scream. Only her body moved, automatic, mechanical. Years of training carving every motion into instinct. But through it all she saw the girl. Still standing in the street. Still pointing. Not moving. Not hiding. And Elise knew. The child wasn't afraid because she had nothing left to lose. Hours blurred. The gunfire slowed, then stopped. The rain swallowed the echoes. Smoke curled from shattered homes. The squad regrouped, their faces lined with exhaustion, fear barely masked. Alvarez swore under his breath. This wasn't supposed to happen, Intel said quiet. Mason's hands shook as he reloaded. His eyes darted to Elise. "That kid, you saw her, right?" She nodded once. He swallowed. "Why didn't she run?" Elise said nothing. Because she knew the answer. She knew what it was to stand still when the world demanded you hide. But she couldn't tell him that, not yet. Later, when the street was theirs again, she stepped away, past the squad, past the broken door, into the quiet house where the child had come from. It was empty, not abandoned, just emptied, plates still on the table, a chair knocked over, a doll on the floor, its face cracked. And a sound. Barely there. A whisper. Her eyes darted to the corner. A shape curled into the shadows. Another child, younger, too young, breathing shallow, clinging to silence. Elise crouched, lowering her weapon. Her voice, soft, almost unfamiliar, broke through. It's okay. The child's eyes widened, tears welled, but she didn't move. And Elise felt it then, the weight pressing down, the truth rising in her throat. This wasn't just a mission. It never had been. This was where her brother had fallen. And now she was staring at the same soil, at another child left behind. History wasn't repeating. It was reminding. And Elise, she wasn't sure she could carry it again. Why couldn't she look the child in the eyes? The girl sat silent in the corner of that broken house, tiny shoulders trembling, hands curled around a threadbare blanket. She was alive. That should have been enough. For most of the squad, it was. But for Elise Ward, it was. Because she knew that look. She had seen it once before on her brother, the night he told her not to wait for him. Now it stared back at her from the eyes of a child. Ward, the squad leader's voice cut from the street, sharp, impatient. Elise turned her head, torn between duty and the fragile figure hiding in the dark. Her boots stayed rooted for a heartbeat too long, and in that beat the child flinched, shrinking deeper into shadow. She whispered low, a promise more to herself than to the girl, "I'll come back." And then she left. Because orders always pulled harder than promises. The squad gathered at the crossroads, the rain still slicing across their shoulders. Faces were tight, drawn by exhaustion and unease. Mason's eyes lingered on Elise, searching for something she didn't offer. "Village should have been clear," Alvarez muttered, scanning rooftops as though expecting more ghosts to crawl out. "Intel's rotten again." No one argued. They all knew it. They all felt the sting of being led blind. But silence carried its own weight, and Elise felt it pressing against her ribs. "Ward," the leader barked. "Check Sector 3 with Mason. Alvarez with me. We sweep, then regroup. No strays." Elise gave a clipped nod, even as her chest burned with the lie she carried. No strays, but she had left one. They moved in pairs, boots soft against the mud. Mason tried to mask his nerves with chatter, but his words stumbled like his steps. "You think she was pointing at us? That kid?" His rifle swayed as he spoke. "I mean, maybe she was just scared, didn't know what she was doing." Elise's silence stretched long enough that he faltered. "You don't think so?" he added, softer this time. She kept her eyes forward, scanning the edges of doorways, the cracks between houses where shadows pooled. She knew. Mason swallowed. His breathing grew uneven, but he didn't argue. Because he had seen it too. Sector 3 lay darker, the storm choking what little light the village had left. Half-collapsed walls loomed like watchmen, and the air smelled of damp ash, as though something here had burned long before the rain ever came. Mason stopped short. "You hear that?" Elise froze, listened. Not the storm, not the drip of water off shattered eaves, something else. A murmur, barely audible. Words in a language Mason didn't understand, but Elise did. The tone was desperate, pleading. She motioned him down. They crouched, backs against the crumbling stone, ears straining. The voice came from inside. A house with no door, its windows gaping like wounds. Mason's hand shook as he gestured. "Do we breach?" Elise's jaw clenched. Every part of her screamed yes, but something deeper whispered wait. Because the words weren't random, they weren't shouted. They were whispered like prayer, like confession. And she understood every syllable. "Help me," the voice said. "Please, they'll come back." Elise's chest tightened. Mason's eyes flicked to her, confused, waiting for command. But she didn't give it, not yet. She edged forward alone, slow as a shadow, rifle angled low. The room revealed itself piece by piece, shattered table, overturned chair, a single candle guttering in the draft. And in the corner a man. Thin, shaking, his hands bound with rough cord, his face bloodied, clothes torn, his eyes widened when he saw her, relief and terror all tangled in one breath. "They'll come back," he rasped in her tongue. "You must leave." Mason stumbled in behind her, rifle raised. "What's he saying?" Elise didn't answer right away. She moved closer, knife flashing in the dim as she cut the cord from the man's wrists. His skin was raw, his hands trembling too hard to rub, feeling back. He gasped, spoke again. "They left me as bait. You must go. The trap isn't finished." Elise's heart hammered once, then steadied. A trap. She had known it, felt it. The child pointing, the silence too heavy. And now this man, broken but breathing, confirming what her instincts had screamed. Mason's face drained pale. "Ward, what's he saying?" She looked at the boy soldier, his fear naked under the red light. She thought about lying, softening the edges. But lies killed faster than bullets. "It's a trap," she said flatly. Back at the crossroads, Alvarez was waiting, impatience etched into every line of his face. The squad leader scanned Elise's report with hard eyes. Hostile survivors still active, village seeded with traps, intel's garbage. His tone was bitter but controlled. "We push on anyway." Mason exploded before Elise could stop him. "Push on, after this. You didn't see that guy, he was torn up, said they'll come back." "Quiet," the leader's voice cut like steel. But Mason kept shaking his head, eyes darting to Elise as if begging her to back him up. She didn't, not yet. Because speaking meant more than disagreeing. Speaking meant exposing what she knew, the language she shouldn't have understood, the history she couldn't confess. So she stayed silent. And silence, she knew, was its own form of betrayal. Later, when the squad spread out to secure perimeters, Alvarez found her leaning against the shattered wall of a barn. Rain streaked his face, cutting paths through the grime. "You ever think," he said, voice low, almost casual, "that none of this is worth it?" She glanced at him. He didn't look like a man who asked questions often. He smirked faintly, but his eyes stayed hard. "Don't give me that blank face. You've thought it, we all have, but me," he tapped his vest where the coin rested. "I got a kid back home, 12, plays soccer, can't kick straight to save his life." He paused, looked away. "I missed his last birthday, told him I'd be back for the next, said it like a promise." His jaw tightened, but I didn't believe it when I said it. The silence that followed was heavier than rain. Elise opened her mouth, closed it again. What could she say? That she too had once promised someone she'd be back, that she had failed. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her pocket. Empty, always empty. "No coin," Alvarez said, catching the motion. "Figures." She almost smiled, but it cracked before it reached her lips. When night deepened, they huddled in the skeleton of an abandoned home. The air was damp, thick with smoke that clung to the ruined walls. Mason sat apart, knees drawn up, staring into the floorboards as though they might give him answers. "You okay, kid?" Alvarez asked, not unkindly. Mason didn't look up. "I just keep thinking about her, that little girl, why she didn't run." His voice broke on the last word. Alvarez muttered something about the world being cruel. Mason just shook his head. Elise sat silent, eyes on the shifting candlelight. She wanted to tell Mason that children didn't always run, that sometimes they pointed because they'd been taught to, because survival wasn't about hiding, it was about obeying. She wanted to tell him she had once been the one frozen still while others fell around her, that she had stood and pointed too, though only at herself. But she said nothing, because her ghosts didn't deserve their sympathy. The storm eased toward midnight. The village seemed to hold its breath, and in that stillness, Elise felt it again, the pull of unfinished truth. She slipped out quietly, boots soft against the wet earth, rifle slung low. She retraced her steps to the house, to the corner where the second child had hidden. The space was empty now. Only the cracked doll remained, its painted smile chipped away. Her throat tightened. She had promised, and once again she had failed. A whisper of movement behind her snapped her back. She spun, rifle raised, but no bullet came. No enemy. Just Mason, standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his helmet. His face was pale, his expression caught between fear and betrayal. "You knew," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, trembling. "You understood him back there, you didn't tell us how." Elise froze. Mason's eyes burned into hers. "Why do you know their language, Ward? Why the hell do you know it?" The silence stretched. Her hand tightened on the rifle. Her chest heaved once. She could lie. Or she could finally admit that this mission wasn't just another line in a briefing. But once she spoke, nothing would be the same again. Why did the night feel too quiet? The village had gone to sleep in uneasy silence, and the squad lay restless in the half-collapsed house they had claimed as shelter. The old walls smelled of dust and oil. Rats moved in the shadows. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the broken shutters like someone breathing too close. Elise sat against the wall, her rifle across her knees, eyes open even when the others tried to close theirs. She didn't trust this silence. She never had. Hours bled away. Mason muttered in his sleep. Alvarez stirred, restless, scratching at the bandage on his arm. Elise heard every sound, every breath, every sigh until the moment the silence shifted. Subtle, barely there, but she knew it. One less rhythm. Someone was gone. She was on her feet before her mind caught up. Heart pounding, she moved to the doorway. The pale light of dawn painted the dirt lane silver. Empty, too empty. Elise's stomach clenched. The villager, the old man who'd offered them bitter tea. His door stood ajar now, swaying slightly in the breeze. Elise felt heat rise in her chest, not from anger, not yet, but from the bitter recognition of betrayal. She swallowed it down. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Sergeant Kane was up instantly. His voice rasped with gravel and fatigue. "What is it?" She didn't answer with words, just pointed. He followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. Within minutes, the squad gathered. Boots scuffed on dry dirt, weapons clutched tighter than they should have been. Mason cursed under his breath. Alvarez muttered something about traps. Nobody wanted to say the word. Elise already felt heavy in her bones. Ambush. The sergeant spat into the dust, then looked at them one by one. If he ran, he didn't run far, which means we're out of time. Move. They advanced in tight formation. The village looked the same as yesterday, but Elise knew better. The air carried tension like static before a storm. Windows too dark, shadows too still. She could feel eyes that weren't there yesterday. Alvarez walked close, whispering like a confession. "I hate this part, not knowing if it's empty or if—" He cut himself off, jaw tight. Elise gave the faintest nod, acknowledging his fear without judgment. It was her fear, too. They pushed past the last hut, the desert stretching ahead. For a moment, nothing. Just sand and stone, the horizon painted in pale fire by the rising sun. Then Elise saw it. A glint. At first it could have been nothing, just light catching on rock, but her breath hitched. No, the angle was wrong, the shimmer too precise. She slowed, heart slamming against her ribs. Her brother had once told her the desert gives warnings if you know how to look. He'd learned too late. Elise had never forgotten. The squad kept walking, step after step, closing in on something they didn't see. Elise's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to warn them, but the words stuck like a stone in her mouth. Silence had become her prison, and breaking it felt like betrayal. She saw the disturbed ground next. Subtle ridges in the dirt just beyond where Mason's boot hovered. Buried wires. Her lungs burned. She opened her mouth, no sound. Not again. Not another name carved into the wall of memory she carried. Not because of her silence. Her voice cracked like thunder. "Stop." The squad froze. Mason's foot hung above the dirt, inches from disaster. He glanced back, startled. Elise didn't blink. Her rifle was raised, eyes fixed on the shimmer. Then came the sound. A sharp click from the rocks. Figures rose like ghosts, shadows breaking into men, rifles leveled, scarves whipping in the wind. The air split with shouts in a language heavy with hate. The squad dropped, scattering for cover. Sand exploded. Bullets carved the dawn apart. Elise dove behind a slab of broken wall, adrenaline flooding her veins. She fired quick bursts, precise, controlled. But her chest trembled, not from fear of death, but from what almost happened. Mason shouted, voice shaking. "She saved me, she." His words cut off in gunfire. The sergeant barked orders, calm under fire. Alvarez cursed as he slammed a new magazine into his weapon. The air was chaos, grit in their teeth, smoke in their lungs, the sharp tang of cordite filling every breath. Elise moved on instinct. Each shot felt like defiance. Not today, not again. Her brother's face flickered behind her eyes, but she forced it down. She wasn't him. She had a chance to finish what he couldn't. Minutes blurred. The attackers pressed hard, but the squad held tighter. Mason's shoulder was grazed. Alvarez bled again, swearing louder this time. Yet they stayed alive, each breath pulled from the firestorm. Then the firing slowed. The desert quiet returned, broken only by echoes and the ringing in their ears. The enemy melted back into stone and sand, vanishing like they'd never been there. Only blood, smoke, and silence remained. Elise stayed crouched, rifle steady, her pulse still hammering. The sergeant scanned the ridges, teeth grinding. They'll be back. They always come back. Mason dropped beside Elise, face pale, sweat mixing with dust. "If you had," he shook his head, laughter trembling with relief. "Damn, you'd think I'd be dead already." She didn't answer, she couldn't. The weight of her voice still pressed heavy on her chest. It wasn't just the danger. It was what speaking had cost her, the flood of memory it dragged with it. Her brother's last call, his voice tired but proud. "Don't worry about me, Lise. We're just clearing a village. Easy in, easy out." She never heard him again. Silence was all that came after. Alvarez slumped nearby, groaning. He looked at her, eyes glassy. "You ever wonder why we do this? Why we keep walking into traps we already know are waiting?" She stared at him, but her answer wasn't for him. It was for herself, quiet, barely a whisper, because someone has to. The sergeant caught it. His gaze lingered, sharp but unreadable, maybe suspicion, maybe understanding. Elise didn't know which scared her more. They regrouped, licking wounds, counting breaths. No one spoke of retreat. Not yet. The mission still burned at the edge of their orders, unfinished and unforgiving. But Elise knew something had shifted. Her silence was broken now. The others had heard her voice, urgent, commanding, alive, and with it came questions she wasn't ready to answer. As the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in merciless light, Elise felt the shadow of her brother's ghost walking beside her. She had shouted once. Could she keep silent again? The village shrank behind them. Ahead lay stone canyons, narrow and dangerous. Somewhere out there, the old man's betrayal was already in motion. And Elise could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Why did the canyon feel like a mouth waiting to close? The squad advanced single file, boots crunching over gravel that shifted with every step. The stone walls rose high on either side, jagged and sun-bleached, cutting off most of the sky. Every echo sounded wrong, too sharp, too delayed. Elise's hands tightened on her rifle, the rough grip biting into her palms. She could feel the weight of silence pressing harder with each step they took inside. Alvarez muttered, barely above a breath, "This is bad ground, too easy to pin us in here." Sergeant Kane's voice was steady, but the tension ran beneath it like current under ice. "We've got no choice. Intel says the cache is hidden past this cut. Stay sharp." Elise lagged near the back, scanning the ridges above. Her eyes caught on shapes that weren't there, shadows shifting where no wind blew. She blinked them away, but the knot in her gut only grew. The canyon narrowed further. Sunlight barely reached the floor now. It was colder here, the air heavier. Mason walked ahead of her, his shoulders hunched as if bracing against something unseen. He turned his head slightly, his voice low. "Hey, thanks again, back there. You saved me." She didn't respond. Words felt heavy in her throat, each one a cost she wasn't sure she could afford. Instead, she gave a faint nod. Mason seemed to accept it, though his jaw worked like he had more he wanted to say. They moved deeper, step after step, their breaths sinking into a rhythm of tension. Then Elise saw it, an object half buried in the dirt, glinting faintly under dust. She froze. Not a weapon, not metal. A child's sandal too small for any of them. Her pulse spiked. Children didn't wander into canyons like this, not by accident. Her eyes darted to the walls again, scanning, searching. She wanted to shout, to warn them, but once more her silence fought her. What if she was wrong? What if her voice broke the thin control they still held? The answer came before she could choose. A crack echoed above, then another, not stone shifting, not wind, gunfire. "Contact!" Kane roared, already diving for cover. The canyon exploded with chaos. Bullets tore the air, sparks leaping off rock. Shouts rained down from unseen figures above. Dust clouds swallowed the squad in choking haze. Elise dropped to her knees back against the wall, returning fire in quick, precise bursts. Her shots echoed sharp, but the enemy had the height, the angles. Every second here was borrowed. Alvarez cursed, clutching at his shoulder as a round clipped him. Mason crawled to pull him behind a rock outcrop, his own rifle blazing with frantic cover fire. The sergeant barked commands, his voice cutting through the chaos, but even he couldn't drown out the truth. They were pinned, outmatched by elevation and numbers. Elise's lungs burned. The world blurred around her, but in the noise she heard something sharper than fear. A memory, her brother's voice. "Don't stay in the kill box, Lise. The canyon will eat you alive." Her breath caught. He said it once long ago before his last mission. She hadn't understood then, she did now. She broke from cover, sliding low across gravel, ignoring the bullets snapping past. Her eyes swept the wall. There, an erosion cut, a climbable crack in the stone. Dangerous, exposed, but the only way. She didn't hesitate. Her boots scraped, hands clawed into rock, muscles screaming as she pulled herself upward. "Reynolds, get back down." Kane's voice thundered, but she kept climbing. Halfway up, her hands slipped, nails tearing skin on rough stone. She bit back the cry, blood slick on her palm, but forced herself higher. Another shot pinged off stone inches from her head. Dust stung her eyes, but she climbed faster, desperate. At the ledge, she rolled over, rifle already raised. The first gunman didn't expect her. Her shot was clean, sharp. He fell without a sound. The second swung his weapon too late. She lunged, slamming into him, the struggle brutal and close. His eyes flashed shock as she drove her knee into his chest and wrenched the rifle from his hands. It clattered away. She fired before he could reach for anything else. For a moment, silence reigned on the ridge. Her chest heaved, sweat dripping, blood from her torn hands streaking the rock. Below, the squad seized the chance. Mason and Alvarez pushed fire outward. Kane rallied them, voice hard as steel. The balance shifted. The attackers faltered. One by one, they melted back into the stone, retreating with shouts that faded into the canyon. When the echoes died, Elise stayed on the ridge, crouched, her rifle still aimed at shadows that no longer moved. Her body shook, not from adrenaline but from the weight of what she had done. Breaking silence twice, taking lives up close. The ghosts pressed heavier now. Kane's voice rose from below, calling her name. "Reynolds, report." She didn't answer right away. She watched the horizon instead, the endless desert stretching beyond the canyon, harsh and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, more weighted. She could feel it. Finally she called down, voice rough, clear. The squad regrouped, battered but breathing. Alvarez's arm was wrapped again, Mason's face streaked with grime. Kane's eyes lingered on Elise, unreadable. Suspicion again, or grudging respect, she couldn't tell. They moved out quickly, no time to linger. But as they walked, Mason drifted close. His voice was softer this time, almost fragile. "You climbed like you knew you had to, like you'd seen it before." Her throat tightened. She wanted to answer, but the truth felt too raw, too dangerous. So she stayed silent. Mason didn't press. He just walked beside her, their silence carrying weight neither could shake. Hours later, as the sun dropped low, the canyon spat them out into a barren plateau. The wind howled across flat stone, carrying grit that stung their faces. Elise pulled her scarf higher, eyes scanning the horizon. She felt hollow, drained, but also alive with a fire she hadn't let herself feel in years. But that fire carried danger. Each time she broke her silence, she felt herself unraveling, pulling closer to the truth she'd buried so deep. The truth of why she was here, of who she'd already lost. And though the squad trudged forward, weary and wounded, Elise knew this wasn't survival yet. This was just the test before the storm. Somewhere in the emptiness ahead, something waited for her, and she feared it wasn't just the enemy. Why did the plateau feel emptier than the desert itself? The squad crossed it in silence, boots dragging over cracked stone. Wind hissed low across the barren ground, carrying no scent of life, no hint of shelter. The sky was raw, streaked with orange and red, as if the sun itself bled into the horizon. Elise walked near the center, her steps steady, but inside she felt every mile like weight pressing deeper into her chest. Alvarez stumbled once, his bandaged arm clutched close. Mason caught him, steadying without a word. The sergeant kept his eyes forward, jaw locked, shoulders squared as if he could bear the weight for all of them. But Elise saw the fatigue in his gait, the way his breaths came heavier now. Her own lungs ached, but not from exhaustion, from memory. Her brother had once described terrain like this: flat, open, merciless. The kind of ground, he'd said, that doesn't let you hide from anything, not the enemy, not yourself. She hadn't understood then. She did now. The plateau seemed endless. Every shadow stretched too long. Every sound carried too far. Elise kept scanning, eyes never resting. Once she thought she saw movement on the ridges miles away, but when she blinked it was gone. Her pulse still quickened. They stopped at dusk. The sergeant signaled a rest near a scattering of jagged rocks, poor cover but better than nothing. The squad dropped heavy, rifles across their laps, eyes burning with fatigue. Mason unscrewed a canteen, took a swig, then passed it down. Alvarez leaned back against stone, his face pale under the dirt. Elise sat apart, her back to the wind. She pulled a folded scrap of paper from her pocket, smoothing it with scarred fingers. The ink had faded, the edges worn soft. Her brother's last letter. She didn't need to read it. She'd memorized every word years ago. But holding it steadied her, even as it cut her open. Kane's shadow fell across her. That from home. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, watching, measuring. Elise tucked it away before answering, "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, then crouched, resting his forearms on his knees. His voice dropped low, meant for her alone. "You've been carrying something since the start, something you don't want us to see, but it's there." Her chest tightened. She met his gaze, forcing her voice steady. "We're all carrying something." For a flicker of a second, she thought she saw understanding in his eyes. Then he stood, his face hard again. "Get some rest. Tomorrow won't be kinder." When he walked away, Elise's breath trembled. She hated how close he'd come to pulling the truth from her. The truth that this mission wasn't just duty, it was personal. It was redemption. Night fell heavy. The plateau turned black under a sky too wide, stars cold and sharp like shards of glass. The squad slept in shifts. Elise lay awake, listening to Mason's quiet snores, Alvarez's ragged breathing, the sergeant's restless shifts. She couldn't sleep. The wind carried whispers only she could hear. Her brother's voice again, soft, fatting. "You'll see me out here, Lise. You'll see me where I fell." Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She hadn't cried in years. The next morning broke harsh and colorless. They moved again, slow but steady, until the plateau began to slope downward into broken hills. Rocks jutted sharp, scattered like bones. Elise felt her senses prickle. Too many places to hide, too many blind corners. They were moving through one narrow cut when Mason broke the silence. His voice was soft, hesitant. "You ever think about what we'll do after, if there is an after?" Alvarez chuckled bitterly, wincing from the pain in his side. "Retire on a beach somewhere. Drink until I forget all this." Mason shook his head. "No, I mean really, what comes after all this? After the uniforms, after the fight, what's left?" No one answered. The question lingered in the air like smoke. Elise's chest ached. She thought of her brother again. There had been no after for him. She wondered if there would be one for her. Hours later, they found it. The cache, hidden inside a collapsed ruin, barely visible under layers of sand and stone. Kane gave the signal and they approached carefully, rifles raised, eyes sharp. Elise's pulse quickened as she scanned the broken walls, the dark doorway. Every instinct screamed caution. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with dust. Crates stacked in shadows, ammunition, weapons, enough to fuel months of attacks. Kane's eyes hardened. This is it. They began clearing the space, checking corners, marking supplies. Mason pried open a crate, whistled low. "This isn't small time. Somebody's feeding them heavy." Alvarez grunted. "Somebody who doesn't care how many bodies it costs." Elise ran her hand lightly over one crate, her fingers tracing the serial numbers burned into wood. Her stomach twisted. She recognized the markings. They matched the ones her brother had written about in his last report. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just another mission. This was his trail, the one that had led him to his death. She stumbled back, the air too heavy. Kane noticed instantly. "Reynolds' report." She swallowed hard, forcing her voice calm. "Just dust, the air's thick." But inside, her silence screamed. The truth clawed at her chest, desperate to be spoken. This was it. The reason she had volunteered, the reason she'd carried her brother's letter through every mile. She was standing in the shadow of what had killed him. Before she could gather herself, a noise cut through the ruin. A scrape, a shift. The squad froze. Then the blast came. The wall at the far end erupted, stone and dust exploding inward. Figures surged through the haze, rifles blazing. The ambush wasn't over. It had only begun. Elise dropped, rolling behind a crate as bullets shredded wood. Splinters cut her skin, but she barely felt it. Mason was shouting, Alvarez firing wild bursts, Kane rallying them with steel in his voice. She raised her rifle, fired sharp, precise. One fell, then another, but more kept coming, shadows in the dust, their shouts echoing like war drums. Her lungs burned, her hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. They had killed her brother, and now they were here in the same ruin under the same banners. Her silence cracked. A roar tore from her throat as she rose from cover, firing controlled, brutal. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was fury wrapped in flesh, and every shot felt like tearing a piece of her past free. The fight dragged on, seconds stretched into eternity. Mason went down to one knee, blood on his leg. Alvarez slumped against a crate, his strength fading. Kane stood tall, firing until his rifle clicked empty, then reloading with hands steady as stone. And Elise, she kept firing until the dust thinned, until the echoes faded, until the ruin fell silent again. Bodies lay scattered. Smoke drifted through broken stone. The squad was alive, but barely. Elise's chest heaved, her hands trembling. Kane looked at her, eyes sharp, unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "That wasn't just dust back there, was it?" She couldn't answer, not yet. Instead, she lowered her rifle, the weight of her brother's memory crushing her chest. She had broken her silence again, and with it came the certainty that the truth would not stay buried much longer. The ruin was quiet now, but the war inside her had only just begun. Why did the silence after battle feel heavier than the bullets themselves? The ruin reeked of dust and smoke. Blood smeared the broken floor, mixing with splintered wood and scattered rounds. Mason leaned against a wall, clutching his bleeding leg. Alvarez sat slumped, eyes half closed, his face gray beneath the dirt. The sergeant crouched near the entrance, scanning the horizon through the ruined gap, jaw set tight. Elise stood in the middle of it all, rifle loose in her hands, chest still rising too fast. She tried to steady her breath, but the weight of what just happened pressed into her ribs until she thought they'd crack. Her ears still rang. Her throat ached from the roar she'd unleashed, something she hadn't planned, something ripped raw from the part of her she tried to bury. And Kane had heard it, they all had. His voice cut the silence like a blade. "Reynolds with me." She stiffened. Mason looked up, eyes flicking between them. Alvarez barely stirred, lost in his haze of blood loss and fatigue. Elise forced her boots forward, each step heavy. She followed Kane outside into the cooling dusk. The plateau stretched endless. The sky was a dying fire streaked with purple and gold. Kane stopped just beyond the ruin, his back straight, his shoulders broad in the fading light. He didn't turn when he spoke. "You've been holding something back. I don't care what it is in detail. But out here, secrets get people killed." Her mouth went dry. She wanted to argue, deny, but the words refused to form. Kane finally turned, his eyes sharp but not cruel. "That scream back there, that wasn't just rage. That was history, and I need to know if your history about to put us in a grave." Her hands clenched around the rifle. She could feel the paper scrap in her pocket pressing against her thigh, her brother's last letter. She almost pulled it out. Almost. But her silence rose again, choking, familiar. Kane studied her a beat longer. Then he sighed, shaking his head. "Fine, keep it. But if your silence costs one of my men, Reynolds," his voice dropped, steel under gravel, "I won't forgive it." He walked back inside, leaving her alone with the wind and the desert sky. Elise stood there, trembling, her chest burning. She wanted to scream again, to tear open everything she'd held shut, but she couldn't. Not yet. Night bled over the plateau. They patched wounds as best they could, rationed water, and set a rotating watch. Elise sat outside, her eyes locked on the horizon. The stars blinked cold above, sharp against the black. She thought of her brother, the way he used to describe constellations on nights when war felt far away. She tried to trace the same patterns, but her vision blurred. "Can't sleep," Mason's voice broke the quiet. He limped out, lowering himself beside her with a pained grunt. She didn't answer at first. He didn't push. He just sat, staring at the sky too. After a long silence, he spoke again. "When I was a kid, my old man used to tell me soldiers don't need sleep. Said fear keeps you awake enough." Elise turned her head slightly. His face was half-shadowed, weary, but there was a faint, bitter smile. "He wasn't a soldier, just a drunk with too many opinions. But sometimes I think about it. Maybe we don't sleep because part of us is afraid if we close our eyes, we won't open them again." Her chest ached at the truth in his words. She thought of her brother again, how he hadn't opened his eyes after his last night. Her voice came quiet, almost fragile. "Sometimes sleep is the only escape." Mason looked at her, surprised she'd spoken, but he didn't say anything more, just nodded slowly, his expression soft. For the first time, Elise felt a strange comfort in his presence, a reminder that she wasn't the only one haunted. The next morning, Kane forced them onward. Alvarez was weak, Mason limped, and even the sergeant's movements carried fatigue, but retreat wasn't an option. The cache had been marked, the ambush fought off. Command needed confirmation, and their squad was the only link left. The landscape shifted as they moved, broken ridges rising like jagged teeth, sand swirling in restless gusts. Elise kept her eyes sharp, her rifle steady, but her mind churned. Each step closer felt like retracing her brother's last path, though no one else knew it. By midday, Alvarez collapsed. His breathing came shallow, skin burning with fever. Mason tried to lift him, but nearly fell with the effort. Kane dropped to one knee beside them, checking the wound. His expression darkened. "He won't make it if we keep pushing like this." Elise's throat tightened. She watched Alvarez struggle, his eyes glassy, lips trembling. For the first time, she saw the cracks in his bravado, the fear bleeding through. He looked at her, whispering rough, "Don't let me fade out here." The words cut deep. They weren't about pain, they were about memory, about not being forgotten in the emptiness of desert stone. Elise's chest burned with the weight of it. Her brother had faded in the same silence. She dropped beside Alvarez, her hand firm on his shoulder. Her voice came steady, though it shook inside her. "You won't fade, not here, not with us." His eyes closed, a faint relief softening his face. For a moment he looked younger, almost peaceful. Kane's gaze lingered on Elise, sharp again. He'd heard her, heard the vow in her voice. They built a makeshift stretcher from broken wood and torn fabric. Mason and Elise bore most of the weight, their muscles screaming with each step. The desert mocked them with its vastness, every mile heavier than the last. By late afternoon, they reached a ravine where jagged cliffs offered a sliver of cover. Kane ordered a halt. They lowered Alvarez gently, Mason's hands shaking with exhaustion. Elise's arms burned, but she didn't show it. She sat nearby, scanning the cliffs, the shadows. Kane crouched beside Alvarez, checking his pulse. His jaw clenched. He didn't speak, but the truth was in his eyes. Alvarez was slipping. Elise felt the sting of helplessness. The ghosts pressed closer. She pulled the letter from her pocket, fingers trembling. For a long moment she just stared at it, the faded ink blurring in her vision. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory. "If I don't make it, Lise, promise me you won't carry me in silence. Promise you'll live louder than I did." Her breath caught. She had broken that promise. Every day since his death she had wrapped herself in silence, believing it was armor. But now she saw it for what it was, a cage. She looked at Alvarez, pale and fatting. She looked at Mason, worn but holding on. She looked at Kane, still stone but carrying more weight than he let show. And for the first time, she felt the truth clawing its way free. She had to tell them, not everything, not yet, but enough, enough to break the cage. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "My brother was here, on this ground, on a mission like ours. He didn't come back." The words hung in the air, heavy, raw. Mason froze. Kane's eyes narrowed, but not in anger, in comprehension. Alvarez stirred faintly, lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Elise swallowed hard, forcing herself on. "That cache we found, it was part of his report. He died trying to cut off the same supply line. I didn't tell anyone because," her chest tightened, her voice breaking, "because I thought if I stayed silent I could carry it alone. But silence doesn't protect. It only kills slower." The wind howled through the ravine, carrying her words away, but the silence that followed was different now. Not the suffocating silence she had lived with. A shared silence. Heavy, but not hers alone. Kane finally spoke, voice low. "Now it makes sense." He looked at her, not with suspicion, but with something sharper, respect. "Your fight isn't just ours, it's personal." Elise nodded, her eyes burning. Mason's voice was hoarse but firm. "Then we finish it for him, for all of us." For the first time in years, Elise felt her chest lighten, even as tears threatened. She blinked them back, staring at the fading horizon. The war wasn't over, the mission wasn't done, but for the first time she wasn't alone in carrying it. And that changed everything. What happens when the truth finally spills, but the mission still isn't done? The ravine was cold by nightfall, the air sharp with desert chill. They lit no fire. Only the wind moved, whispering through the broken stones, carrying ghosts in its breath. Alvarez lay wrapped in their torn jackets, his face pale, chest rising shallow but steady. Mason sat guard, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the shadows above. Kane paced in silence, every step deliberate, like a man trying to walk off the weight pressing his shoulders. And Elise sat apart, letter still folded in her hands. She hadn't put it away since revealing the truth. The ink was faded, but in the pale starlight she could still trace the words, every curve written by her brother's hand. For the first time she hadn't read it in silence. She had let others share its burden, and it felt like a wound reopening, raw, bleeding, but healing too. Her chest still ached, but she breathed easier. Mason shifted, breaking the quiet. "So what now?" His voice was low, meant for Kane, but his eyes flicked to Elise. Kane stopped packing. He stood over them, silent a moment longer, then spoke. "Now we move before dawn. That supply line isn't just about crates in the sand. If your brother was right, Reynolds, there's a network under this plateau, a chain feeding the war. If we cut it, we cripple their reach in this whole sector." The words carried weight, heavier than stone. Elise closed her eyes. The network. It was what her brother had whispered about in his last message, just before silence swallowed him. She had believed it was gone with him, just rumor. But Kane's certainty rekindled the flame of his unfinished fight. She opened her eyes, voice soft but steady. "He said the same. He died trying to prove it was real." Kane's jaw tightened. "Then we finish what he started." Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken resolve. Hours later they moved. Dawn was only a faint promise on the horizon, the sky bruised purple. They left Alvarez sheltered in the ravine, wrapped in whatever warmth they could spare, a flare pistol beside him if he needed to signal. Mason squeezed his shoulder before leaving, a quiet vow exchanged without words. Alvarez's eyes opened just enough to meet Elise's gaze. His lips moved, whispering a fragile go. Her throat tightened, but she nodded, and then they left him behind. The climb was brutal. Rocks tore at their hands, loose stones slid beneath boots. The plateau loomed above, its ridges jagged like a fortress carved by nature and war alike. Mason grunted with each step, his wounded leg dragging, but he pushed on, stubborn. Kane led, movements efficient, focused. Elise followed, heart pounding with each pull upward, her brother's shadow climbing beside her. When they reached the top, the wind hit like a blade. The plateau stretched vast, barren at first glance, but then Elise saw it. Tracks cut into the earth, faint but undeniable. Vehicle paths worn deep. And beyond, camouflaged under torn netting and rock, the outlines of storage crates, antennas, and low structures half dug into the earth. A supply hub, hidden in plain sight. Mason exhaled, voice low. Well, he wasn't lying. Elise's chest burned at the sight. Proof. Her brother hadn't died for nothing. But the ache of it twisted with anger too, because this meant command should have known, should have acted sooner. And yet it had taken them, broken, bleeding, forgotten, to uncover it. Kane crouched, scanning through binoculars, his jaw flexed. Heavily guarded, at least 2 squads, possibly more underground. We'll need to confirm structure and relay coordinates. Elise swallowed, and then what? His eyes flicked to her, cold, practical. Then we call it in and pray the strike lands before we're found. Mason muttered, praying, not exactly a plan. Kane didn't answer. His silence was the answer. They moved closer, crawling along broken ridges, sand biting their faces, weapons tight in their hands. Elise's pulse thudded in her ears, louder than the wind. She counted guards, watched patrol patterns, every detail sinking into her mind like marks on paper. Kane whispered notes, Mason marked angles. Hours passed in silence, broken only by their breaths. And then voices, foreign, harsh, echoing off stone, a patrol too close. They froze, bodies pressed flat against sand and rock. Elise's chest heaved, every muscle screaming to stay still. The voices grew nearer. Boots crunched gravel. For a moment, she swore the guards could hear her heartbeat. Her hand drifted to her brother's letter, a reflex, a prayer. The voices lingered, arguing, and then slowly they faded back down the ridge. Elise exhaled, her breath shaking. Mason gave her a look, half smirk, half relief, but his eyes betrayed fear too. They had come too close. By nightfall, they had everything they needed. Positions marked, numbers estimated, antenna coordinates noted. Kane whispered into the radio, his voice clipped, sending data back to command. Static filled the silence. Then a voice crackled through, distorted. Copy, strike window, 20 hours. Extraction unavailable. Hold position until confirmation. Mason's face twisted. Hold position, out here, with 2 squads breathing down our necks. Kane lowered the radio, his face unreadable. Elise's stomach dropped. She knew what that meant. 20 hours was a lifetime in enemy territory. Kane spoke calm but sharp. We dig in, we survive, that's it. The hours bled together in the dark. They hid in shallow cover, every sense stretched to breaking. Elise felt the weight of silence pressing in, heavier than ever. Each minute ticked slow, cruel. Mason whispered a story about his sister back home, how she used to steal his boots and fill them with flowers. His voice cracked halfway through. Kane didn't respond, but his hand tightened around his rifle. Elise listened, heart aching. She thought of her brother again, the way he used to tell her the stars were maps if you knew how to read them. She whispered the memory into the night, surprising herself. Her voice was soft, fragile, but real. Mason smiled faintly. Kane's head tilted, listening though he said nothing. And in that moment, for the first time, Elise felt like her silence had cracked open, not broken but shared. The night deepened. The cold bit harder. Elise fought sleep, her mind slipping into memories she couldn't control. Her brother's face, laughing one moment, bloodied the next, his voice begging her to promise, his silence after. She jerked awake when Kane's hand touched her shoulder. His eyes were sharp, his whisper urgent. They're moving. Below, the camp stirred. Guards shifted, crates hauled. Lights flickered across the plateau. Something was changing, something big. Kane's jaw set. They're relocating, they know they're compromised. Elise's chest tightened. If the supply chain vanished before the strike, her brother's death would mean nothing. All their suffering, Mason's wound, Alvarez's fatting breath, nothing. She heard herself whisper before she thought, we can't let them move it. Kane looked at her, Mason too. The silence pressed heavier. Kane finally spoke, slow, that's not our order. Her voice broke, trembling but fierce. Orders don't matter if we lose this. My brother died trying to stop it. Alvarez might be dying for it right now. We can't let them erase it. The air froze. Kane's eyes locked on hers, unblinking. Then slowly he nodded. Mason muttered, guess we're all insane then. And just like that, the decision was made. They would act, outnumbered, outgunned, against orders, because sometimes silence wasn't survival, sometimes silence was betrayal. And Elise knew, for the first time, her voice was stronger than her fear. What do you call the moment when silence finally breaks, not with words but with choice? The plateau shimmered under the last sliver of moon. The supply hub below pulsed with movement, engines growling, crates dragged, lights flickering across sand like restless stars. They were dismantling the entire network, loading pieces onto armored trucks, erasing the evidence before the airstrike could land. Time was slipping away. Elise crouched at the ridge, eyes locked on the scene. Her heartbeat thudded loud in her ears, drowning out the night. This was it, the same ground where her brother had died, where his voice had vanished forever. And now the same silence threatened to bury everything he fought for. Her hands shook against the rifle, but her eyes were steady. Kane crouched beside her, face carved from stone, eyes scanning like a machine. Mason was on her other side, leg trembling with pain but rifle ready, jaw tight. We hit them, Kane murmured, voice low, a growl against the wind. Not to win, just to stall, long enough for the strike to matter. Mason muttered, long enough to get ourselves killed. Elise whispered, or long enough to give it meaning. Kane glanced at her. His eyes lingered, not with judgment but with something else. A question. She didn't flinch. The silence between them was the answer. Kane gave a single nod. The plan was desperate. 3 shadows against a fortress. But sometimes war didn't care about numbers. Sometimes it cared only about the weight of one decision. They crawled down the ridge, breath shallow, bodies pressed to sand. The camp loomed closer, voices louder, lights harsher. Elise could smell the oil, the dust, the sweat of men moving with urgency. Her brother had been here. She felt him in every step. They reached the edge of the camp. Mason set charges on the fuel drums stacked near the perimeter, his hands trembling but precise. Kane cut the power to an antenna, movement swift, ruthless. Elise slid into position behind a crate, rifle steady, breath tight. And then the moment snapped. A guard turned, eyes wide, shout rising. Elise didn't think, she fired. The crack split the night, echoing through stone. The guard fell, silence shattered, chaos erupted. Shouts, boots pounding, lights flaring, gunfire ripping the dark. Mason slammed the last charge, yelling hoarse, "Go!" The explosion tore through the drums, fire roaring into the sky. The ground shook, smoke billowed. The camp convulsed in panic, men scattering, trucks grinding to a halt. Elise fired again and again, breath sharp, vision narrowed to the scope. Mason hobbled to cover, blood slicking his bandage. Kane moved like a blade, efficient, merciless. But the storm grew. More guards poured out, gunfire shredding the air. Bullets sparked against stone, ripped through sandbags. Elise ducked, ears ringing, chest heaving. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't carry me in silence. Live louder." She rose again, firing into the storm, each shot a vow. Mason's voice cracked through the chaos. "We're not gonna hold." Kane's jaw clenched. "Then we make them bleed for every second." Elise's rifle clicked empty. She slammed a new mag, fingers slick with sweat. Her throat burned, lungs raw, but she kept firing. The second explosion ripped through another stack, flames consuming crates. The camp was chaos now, men shouting, trucks swerving, the network burning before their eyes. But the cost pressed closer. Mason took a hit, falling hard, blood pooling dark beneath him. Elise scrambled to his side, dragging him back behind cover, her hands shaking. His eyes met hers, sharp but fatting. Don't stop." His voice was weak but fierce. "Finish it." Her throat closed. "I'm not leaving you." His hand gripped hers, iron despite the tremor. "You don't get it, Reynolds. None of us leave here, that's the point. The strike needs time, give it." Tears blurred her vision. She wanted to scream, to deny, but his eyes held her, steady, final, and she knew. The silence between them was heavier than any words. She pressed his hand once, hard, then rose again. Kane was still fighting, his rifle barking, his body a wall against the storm. But even he was bleeding now, his shoulder torn, his face grim. Elise joined him, side by side, firing into the dark. The sky trembled with the roar of engines, not trucks, jets. The strike was coming. Kane's eyes flicked to Elise. A faint, grim smile cracked his face. "Worth it." Then he surged forward, drawing fire, his last stand carved in flame. Elise's scream ripped raw, but her body moved. She fired, covered him, gave every ounce left in her. The world blurred in smoke, fire, blood. And then light. The strike hit. The sky tore open, thunder crashing, fire raining. The plateau convulsed as bombs hammered the camp, the ground erupting, shockwaves slamming through her chest. Crates shattered, trucks flipped, the network obliterated in a storm of fire. Elise was thrown back, her body slamming against stone. Her ears rang, her lungs crushed. She coughed, choking on dust, blinking through smoke. Silence followed, heavy, final. The camp was gone. Flames licked the night, smoke twisting into the stars. Elise crawled, her body screaming, searching. Mason lay still, his face calm at last. Kane was gone, buried in flame and stone. Her chest broke, but her brother's letter was still in her pocket. She pulled it out, the ink smudged, the paper torn but still there. She pressed it to her lips, tears streaking through the ash on her face. And for the first time she spoke aloud, her voice raw, breaking the silence. "I kept the promise, I lived louder." Her words carried into the fire, into the night, into the silence that had haunted her for years. And the silence answered, not with emptiness but with memory, with dignity, with meaning. She sat among the ruins until the horizon bled with dawn. The sky painted in fire and ash. Alone, but not truly. Never again. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.